Councilmember Farmer,
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Galani,
Here.
and Chair Bartoni.
Here. So thank you, everyone. The next thing on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Do I have a motion, or does anybody have any questions on the minutes? If not, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes made by Councilmember Clark, seconded by Councilmember Nyan. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Any discussion?
Chair Bartoni, I'm sorry, I had a question. Not
Sure,
a
go
motion,
ahead.
not
Go ahead.
motion.
Oh, not a motion. Okay, we'll go ahead with the question.
I was a bit confused about item 4A1, that we had a motion. I had made a motion and there was an amendment to the motion and then withdrew the motion. And we did not formally change that to the amendment to a motion. We just went straight into assuming it was a motion. And I was wondering if we needed to, it's considered on the minutes as being a second motion. So I wondered if we needed to make that formal.
So good question. I was actually going to make a comment about this. When you had brought this up to me at our council meeting, I did reach out to our city attorney Young, and I asked him to watch the video and to give his input. And he was comfortable with the way we did it and said that, I guess his summary was that no further action or correction was necessary. And I believe Mr. Cross and Mr. Vunish were both copied on the email. Am I interpreting his, I guess, summary correctly?
That is correct. He said no action, further action required. Yes, sir, you are correct.
Okay, thank you. So are you comfortable then, Teresa?
Yes, and I will go ahead with that motion then.
Okay, so we do have a motion, and Tracy, you're still seconding the motion for approval of minutes. Okay, was there any other discussion on the minutes? Okay, seeing no questions or no discussion, all those in favor of the approval of the minutes, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. So before we get into the public input, I did have a couple of announcements I was going to make, one of which we just took care of, excuse me, regarding the motion that was made at the last meeting. But the other thing I want to mention, and I want to apologize, and I'm not going to call the person's name out, but one of the council members did reach out to me after the last meeting and said that one of the comments that I had made in the meeting was they felt inappropriate and it was upsetting to them. And I did apologize to that council member, and I wanted to apologize to the whole committee as well. It was definitely not my intention. It's not my personality. And I will learn from it, and hoping I'm going to continue to strive to do better. But if anybody does have, you know, if I say anything or if I do anything that makes anybody uncomfortable, please reach out to me and we'll address it immediately. So thank you for letting me say that and indulging me. So next thing on our agenda is public input. We do have a few attendees out there. So Travis, does anybody have their hand up that wants to speak?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Ms. Fisher just raised her hand.
Okay, we will start with Mrs. Fisher. So Travis, if you want to move her over.
Hi all, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thanks as always for listening. Just have a couple comments regarding obviously the sound issue. It's Nancy and Dan Fisher at 2066 Wild Horse Creek Road. First of all, a thank you to Mr. Vunich and Mr. Newberry for visiting the site and taking the pictures of the motors. We were quite satisfied with the previous visual verification, but this gives us even greater peace of mind that the motors have been documented in this way. So we really appreciate that. I did want to comment on something that was brought up at last month's meeting. Someone, and I apologize for not remembering who, used the analogy of running their lawnmower and how the sound is very different from when you start it to driving it to engaging the blades. And that scenario was somewhat dismissed by Dr. Thunder, saying it was comparing a gas engine to an electric motor. And as I had some time to think about it, I realized he's clearly a sound expert and I'm not. But I could say that I think we all have experience with electric motors. For instance, using a common household box fan, an electric motor pushing air, not that unlike an aerator. And clearly, if you're running one fan, the sound changes a great deal based on if you have it on low, medium, or high. Likewise, if you were to have 6 identical box fans, the sound running only one of them will be significantly different than running all 6 of them at the same time. Again, I'm not an expert, and I know he didn't like the lawnmower analogy, but I think that's something for all of us to think about as far as electrical motors. And I obviously use this example to lend a little credence to our continued request to test all of the motors running at the same time. We've talked at length about that since well before the testing in the spring, and our request is the same today as it was back then, to test the sound level at the fish farm with all the new motors running at full capacity concurrently. Having been faithful tax-paying Wildwood citizens for over 20 years, we certainly feel that $1,675 is well worth the cost to finally give assurance that the noise level will fall below what we hope will soon be the revised lower ordinance level, and finally put this issue to bed. As of Mr. Vunich's latest visit, it appears the 3 clogged motors have been cleaned. As he stated, he was able to turn on and listen to all the motors independently. Well, I realize there's now yet another issue with an aluminum hood, support beams, and many feet of piping that's being used as a reason that all the motors cannot be running concurrently. I'm confident that Mr. Lisk will do the right thing and correct that as well. After all, if this is his livelihood, it's only in his best interest to have those all up and running at capacity, not only for this test, but for the ultimate success of his business. We sincerely hope you can see that this is not a case of bad blood or of trying to test Mr. Lisk into non-compliance. It's an absolutely logical conclusion to either moving this along so Mr. Lisk's permitted uses can be restored and the rest of us can all get on with our lives in peace and quiet, or if heaven forbid the test fails, to move on to what the actual solution might be. I can only imagine you are all as frustrated, tired, and honestly sick of discussing this issue as we are. It's been a long 9 years. So please do not stop short of this final test. Please move to approve it, and with all 6 motors running at full capacity at the same time, and yes, I've said that 100 times, to assure that this painful chapter can at long last be closed, not only for the peace and quiet we the neighbors deserve, but for Mr. Lisk and the city of Wildwood as well. I really appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Sorry. So thank you, Mrs. Fisher. And we have Mr. Smith with his hand up also. So Travis, are you move him over, please? Mr. Smith, if you can hear us, you are muted.
Yep, I am.
Go.
There. How's that? Is that better?
There you go.
Hello, I'm Gil
Much
Smith.
better.
As if you all don't know our address, you probably have it memorized between the Fishers and us, 2054 Wild Horse Creek Road. Chuck Goulas and Gil Smith, we both reside here. We've been here since, as you know, 1993. I'll make my comments relatively brief, primarily because we mirror almost identically to what Nancy and Dan Fisher have said. A couple of things that I would like to say, first of all, is Joe, thank you for you and your team and the council members for coming out to the site, taking the pictures, documenting the motors, and all of that information. That certainly was a great deal of help. The good news is we feel like we're almost there. The bad news is we've sat in countless meetings and we've talked about testing all 6 motors at one time. It does appear that the city is wanting to move towards not testing all 6 motors. I just plead to the council to really take that into consideration. I don't think any of us would take a car that says, well, we tested the brakes, but we didn't test the steering and it should be okay. That's unacceptable to us. We still feel that all 6 motors need to be tested. Once those motors are tested, pass the test, it's great. The other question I have is a question that I have, and also Chuck Goulas has, is why is Mr. Lisk not wanting to test all 6 motors? If this is a business that he wants to run, it seems to me he would want to run the test, please the council, please his neighbors, and move forward. So thank you for your time. I hope that in your talks on this, and you can take all of these comments to light and take some seriousness to it, and also maybe come to a solution once and for all. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We appreciate your comments. Is there anybody else, any other participants or attendees that would like to speak? Okay, so looks like we are good there. Thank you very much, everyone. That takes us to the meat of the agenda. So we have 3 planning matters and 4 parks matters. Starting off with the aquaculture, and Joe, I will let you have it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, before the department begins its explanation of the memorandum that's been provided for tonight's meeting, I would like to note a couple of items. At the August 2021 meeting of the committee, Mr. Cross and I were kind of given 2 charges. One was to obtain access to Mr. Lisk's property so that photographs could be taken of all 6 aerators or blowers, depending on how you'd like to describe them. The second was to request from Dr. Thunder a proposal for work, for an additional set of work on the site. That work would be inclusive of having each of the aerators, blowers turned on individually and doing a test on each of them in terms of the overall sound associated with them. In the memorandum, the department has provided that information that Mr. Cross and I gathered. And so from the perspective of those 2 tasks, we'd like to think that we've accomplished them according to the committee's direction. In the memorandum, the department identifies the results of that process, and then also at its conclusion asks for direction and action on the 3 items that have been the subject of many meetings, as has been described during our public participation. I do want to acknowledge that over the course of the period of time from early June till now, Mr. Lisk, the operator of the aquaculture facility, has provided access on 2 occasions to city personnel or city consultants. And without that access, certainly we wouldn't be to the point we are today. So I do want to acknowledge his cooperation and participation. The last test, and the results of which were provided at the August 2021 meeting of the committee, was the 4th of 4 tests taken on the site. 2 were done by a local consulting firm, McClure Engineering. The last two by Aquatic Associates, Dr. Thunder, Steve Thunder, and their company. To date, again, the department would just like to emphasize that none of those tests have identified violations in terms of the current noise code. Current noise code requires a 55 decibel level at the property line for daytime hours and 50 decibel level at the property line for nighttime hours. The process has certainly been one that has led us on many discussions. The memorandum identifies the desire of the department for the committee to consider retaining the current definition of hours for daytime and nighttime purposes, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. for daytime, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. for nighttime. It also recommends that the nighttime decibel level of the noise code be reduced from 50 decibels to 45 decibels. And then finally, restoring the permitted rights in the non-urban resident district to the property where the aquaculture operation is located. In previous meetings, Mr. Lisk and others have described a desire to receive those permitted uses onto the property so as a single-family dwelling could eventually be constructed on the property in conjunction with the current aquaculture operation. Those are the three items that have been identified in the memorandum for consideration tonight. I do want to conclude by just stating that in Mr. Newberry's visit and mine this past week, we did and were able to have all 6 motors running, not at the same time, but at least with 4 at all times. I brought Mr. Newberry because he has younger ears than I. And as you age, sometimes things you think you hear, you don't hear anymore. And with Mr. Newberry there, I was hoping that if there was something I was missing, he would not. We both concluded that the levels of sound were consistent amongst the aerators blowers. There was no difference once started amongst them. And certainly the discrete tone that had been a concern from the onset of the operation was absent. I would note finally that the aerators blowers are not the problem associated with the 3 pens that were not operational during the June 2020 visit by Steve Thunder. The equipment, so to speak, is just the tip of the iceberg that's visible above the water line. Below there is an aluminum hood that provides protection to a series of piping and hoses that are necessary for the aeration of the pens, given the quantity of fish associated with them. From photographs provided by the petitioner, Mr. Lisk, and our visual inspection of that at that time, it is clear that these are large pieces of equipment that are below the water line, not visible from any portion unless you're generally standing right next to them. And again, the extent of work to address those problems that exist with those pieces of equipment below the water line appeared to be extensive from the description provided by Mr. Lisk, and may be part of the reason why they're delayed, certainly in being repaired. All in all, I think Mr. Cross, Mr. Newberry, and I have completed the task assigned by the committee. We are presenting the 3 items for discussion, consideration, and action. And with that, the department will conclude its presentation and extend its appreciation for your attention during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And Joe, you are looking for action from the committee to either move forward with your recommendation or not, but just to move it on to the council, correct?
Yes, sir. I understand the concerns of certain committee members as well as Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Goulas and Mr. Smith. But as I say, at this stage, we have our expert consultant that says, even though 3 of the blower aerators were not operational, there is a mathematical equation that can be used to interpret such, and they feel comfortable with that mathematical interpretation. So at this stage, I think it may be a discussion for the larger group. Thank you.
Okay, and I got a couple hands up, but Mr. Cross, go ahead first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Bartoni. I just wanted to share a little bit of information that Joe may have briefly touched on, some things and others he did not. As Mr. Vunich mentioned, he and I were charged with completing those 2 tasks that he enumerated at the beginning of his talk. I'd like to just point out a couple things. First of all, Mr. Vunich and I in my office called Mr. List to set up that meeting whereby Mr. Vunich would go out and visit the property. Mr. Lisk at first was reluctant to have someone come out on the property and didn't feel an additional visit was necessary or worthwhile. We did talk with him at length and explained the process and that we were hopefully getting towards the end and that he did eventually acquiesce to do that and saw the benefit in doing that and then welcomed city staff to go out there and take a look at it. Mr. Vunich and I also met with Mr. Lisk in person in a conference room here at City Hall and had a long discussion about the whole process. Then when Mr. Vunich and Mr. Newberry went out to visit the property, when they returned, I met with the 2 of them and questioned them at length in terms of what they saw, what they did, in particular the pictures, and Mr. Vunich shared those with me, but also the sounds that they heard, not only right there on the dock at the motors, but at a distance away. And I got the impressions of both Mr. Vunich and Mr. Newberry, who both indicated that the sounds were very minimal. And they, although there was no formal testing, there was no instrumentation utilized in that, it was just their impressions. But as Mr. Vunich said, 2 gentlemen at 2 different age groups with perhaps different can hear different tones in their hearing, both indicated that it wasn't very noticeable at all. The last item, though, that was a little problematic was that when Mr. Lisk was presented with with the second part of the task that Mr. Vunich and I were assigned, which was to see if we could have the consultants come back to do any further testing, was quite adamant that he would not allow anyone else on the property at that time. So it was pretty strong that he felt that he was at the end and didn't want to go any further, didn't feel the need to go any further. So that information I just wanted to share with the group in terms of what they saw, what they downloaded, if you will, to me and filled me in. So if that's of any value to the committee, I wanted to share that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Before we get in, sorry. So thank you, Mr. Cross. So before we get into the discussion, does anybody want to make the motion that the department is looking for? Mr. Flasher, I see your hand up. Are you making the motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
Forward, or do you want to speak first?
I'm ready to make the motion to move forward. I think we have exhausted every measure we have here, and it's time to get the ball rolling here and get it to council where we can discuss further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mike, I saw your hand up. Are you seconding the motion then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a motion, and I have Teresa, I have your hand up. So go ahead, please.
I think Tracy's hand up was before me. No? Okay. Well, I guess I've given this a lot of thought, and especially since last week, and spoke with the neighbors as well. And looking back over this whole 8 years or whatever it's been that this has been going on, it looks like it comes down to we have ordinances, we have different standards that we hold everybody to in the city. However, we don't have processes for measurement to coincide with all of those standards. In every technical job I've had, when we have a standard, there's always a measurement process to go through. And so we've gotten to this point where we had to come up with a way, and the neighbors wanted a certain thing, and we tried to accommodate that, but we don't have a set procedure for measuring this. We say we want it to meet a certain number, but that procedure for getting there, we don't have that specific test method to set the parameters. So that's number one. I think that we need to go back and revise some things for our constituents, so that we have a quantitative way of measuring what we ask them to meet. I think that we've been saying, oh, well, we need more information, we need more testing. But actually, if we had done the test appropriate and formal and professional test methods to start with, we wouldn't be going through this. It's not that we're asking for additional information. We're asking for it to be done right. And so I think that's what the neighbors are asking for too. And regarding this current issue at the fish pond, and I'm speaking for Mr. List as well as the people who live over close to it, that we should have had this done for him a long time ago also. But the aquaculture project that we're talking about, we cannot quantify sound levels without test equipment. We can't go and we cannot, a human being, all human beings here at a different level, regardless of your age or your hearing ability. You can't quantify that. You can go out and say, well, I think it's this or I think it's that, but we cannot come up with a something to base our actions on, in my opinion. We cannot make any educated assumptions about the sound levels of these motors that were damaged and then repaired. We can't predict what sounds or what frequencies they're going to produce. And since we've not established a specific measurement or the parameters and carried them out the way that we established it, the resolution for the owners of the operation as well as the neighbors has been delayed. If these units or the very long tubing becomes clogged, it's going to give you a different frequency. Think about this. If you have a vacuum cleaner, because really that's what it is, it's a vacuum cleaner. It's a vacuum cleaner. It brings in air in one side and it pushes out air in the other side. And if you take your vacuum cleaner hose and you turn it on, you can hear that frequency. If you clog it up, if you put that hose up against your hand or something, that frequency goes up. It goes from a low frequency to a high frequency. So because these have been clogged in the past, and we don't know if they've been repaired fully, I can't tell you that frequency, that discrete tone that we're talking about, is not there, that those people hear. And maybe I don't, because I've been in loud businesses most of my my working time. So I can't support that until we have gone ahead and done close to what our residents are asking for, and objectively and quantitatively tested for the sound level and frequency so we can quantitatively verify that it's not there with the machines that are working at this time. I did look up the manufacturing specifications for the model that was listed, and they indeed, and I thought it would be this way, but they indeed have different levels of function. It can vary in air volume. So the air volume is going to, the air volume is going to change the pressure, which is going to change the noise that's produced. So we have quite a 100 meter cube per hour difference that can be in these specific models. Just something to think about before we vote.
I need to remember to unmute myself. So Dan, did you have your hand up also? Because I don't see it up now, but I saw it up earlier. Or did you take it down? Or?
I don't have my hand up, but I would sure like to respond when that time is appropriate. But I saw Deb and whoever's hands up before my response time, I guess.
Okay, I'll get you on the list next. Deborah, you are next, please.
I thought Tracy was next.
I got you next.
Okay. So I have to agree with Teresa, and I have to agree with the residents. We need to support our residents. I understand Mr. Lisk is also a resident, but there are more of them around his business than just him. And they have been at this for 9 years trying to get this aquaculture operation to be amenable for them to live next to. I mean, Wildwood is a place where we expect quiet and, you know, a good quality standard of living. And I totally agree. We need to test all 6 motors at the same time. I think we fall short if we don't do that. But as I've said a couple of times, I really think we need to separate these issues. I think we need to first establish what our noise code is going to be. If we make a decision about this aquaculture operation prior to establishing what our noise code is going to be, then we could very well get to our noise code and say, oh, well, you know, it should actually be lower than what Mr. Lisk equipment is being measured at. So I really think we're kind of doing this backwards. We need to separate those. And I think that's extremely important. I think that's important for the quality and the professionalism of our final decision. So I totally agree, you know, with the residents. I'm 99% of the time agree with the residents. And I can't move this forward either. And we, you know, if we take a survey of the residents and the majority of the residents around him says, okay, we're all right with not doing all 6 at once, you know, then I would rethink that. But I really think it's important to do all 6 at once. And like Teresa said, their different circumstances will result in different decimal level and different tonal level. So I can't support the vote that's been presented. I can't. I'm sorry. The amendment. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Deborah. Tracy, did you have your hand up? Okay, Dan, go ahead, please.
Okay, sorry, my dog's barking, so I'm hoping that I can get this in before it goes crazy here. Anyway, I feel like we've paid a lot of money and we've put a lot of time into having professionals give us a professional opinion. And their professional opinion was that we are fine with the codes that we are trying to set forth here. They said, I'm looking at this thing right now, it says it's 36 dBs, and they said it would be 3 more if it doubled in sound, which would put us at 39, which is still well below the 45 that we are shooting for right now. So even, let's just say hypothetically they're off by 1 or 2, we're still well below the 45. I think we have done everything that has been asked here. The professionals have done everything that's been asked. Mr. Lisk has been more than accommodating during this whole process as well. And I don't know how much longer. I mean, Steve kind of insinuated that he's kind of getting to his edge here of how accommodating he's going to be. So my opinion is, we paid professionals. They gave us a professional opinion. Let's go with the professional's opinion. That's why we paid them the money in the first place. And we need to move this forward, and the council can debate it at maximum if they want. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I don't see any more hands. Oh, Deborah, is your hand up again? Oh, okay. I don't see any more hands up. Oh, Mike, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just would echo what Dan just said regarding, you know, I totally understand the neighbors and their concerns, and obviously it's our jobs to address those concerns and look out for the best interests of our residents, which, you know, to his point, I believe we have done. And our job is to also work for Mr. Lisk. I mean, he's a resident and a business owner in our city, just as important as any other neighbor or resident as well. So I don't think, you know, that it's unfair to seek to move this thing forward. This has been going on for a long time. He's participated and cooperated with all of the different studies and continued visits to his site. I don't feel like he's made any attempt to hide any information or withhold anybody from being able to have access to test the equipment. And the last thing is the sound experts that we had come out there. You know, we're talking about who went out there and what it sounds like, and maybe certain people's ears are different than others. I mean, that's all great, but that's just circumstantial. We had a professional company that are experts in noise and have specific equipment that's top of the line technology to study and test and verify and document the noise levels. And they were fully aware of all of the different motors. And although there were 3 when they were out there, they were the same motors, and they were able to make that estimation. And nobody that's been out there has made any statement to say that any of the other motors sound different or louder or anything like that. If that was the case, I could understand going further to make sure. But at this point, we have no evidence of any kind to suggest that there would be any difference in what was already stated by the experts, and we've already paid them to do that. So I feel like we're just kind of chasing our tail at this point and just continuing to jump through hoops to perhaps find a reason to deny this business to continue operating. And I know that I'm not saying that that's the case, but it just feels like, you know, we could keep going on forever with additional studies and additional visits and what have you. I think it's just time that we put this thing to bed, and it seems like everybody's done the due diligence that makes sense, in my opinion, to get to the end.
Thank you, Mike. Rob, I see your hand up, and Dan, I have you next, and then Tracy.
Thanks. I'll be real quick. Ms. Clark is exactly correct that the pitch, the frequencies involved will change if you plug the motors and so forth. And but I think what is of greatest concern to me is that she's also right that this was a sort of an ad hoc process. We need to take this at minimum as a learning experience and figure out how we can do some objective testing right up front and solve this problem in a year instead of 8 years. I think Ms. McCutcheon is also on point, suggesting that it's a bit premature to make this decision when we don't have when we haven't really finalized the standard that we're trying to meet. But on balance, I agree with Dan that you know, it's 36 dB. If they double it, it's 39. might be 40. That's still well under the nighttime maximum of 45. In fact, it's dramatically below. I haven't been out there to experience the monotonous hum or whatever that folks were complaining about, and I would be livid myself if I had to live with that in a place that was formerly nothing but peace and quiet. So I feel for the folks that are complaining, but I think the standards, you know, these folks are, this operation is going to be below our new quieter standard. And I ran the numbers myself. I looked into the some of Dr. Thunder's work to the extent I could. Made perfect sense. Their explanation made great sense, and I think it's probably appropriate to do what the department suggests: move this forward to council and discuss it one final time there, because I'm not sure, based on my understanding, I don't know that we'd get anything further from a test of all six motors. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Dan, go ahead, and Tracy, you're next.
Yeah, I just have a question. Maybe someone can answer this. If
Sure.
the decibel level exceeds 45, assuming that's what we all agree on here at the end, would there be some sort of repercussions to him if he did go over 45 from that point on? I mean, we're setting a new standard, and right now they're saying that he's standard, but if we find out later on that he's over the standard, then he would be held to that code, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I guess I don't have any idea why we continue to talk about this. Then I think this just needs to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Tracy, go ahead, please.
I think this is one of those issues where I can see both sides of it a little bit. And I hope everybody's seen Mr. Lisk's comments on the chat that the blowers were never damaged and that all the blowers have been new. But I guess I also feel like Dan just said, we could test all 6 of them, and in 2 weeks, something could happen to one of them and the sounds could change anyways. So I don't feel that there's a need to test them all. I think, you know, we've been looking at this for such a long time. If this gets approved, I believe he's planning to build a home out there. And to me, if you're building a home on that property and you're right there with them, who has, you know, he's got the best motive to have the noise be at a good level because he's going to be right there with it as opposed to one of the neighbors. So, I mean, to me, that means he would be watching it more carefully than ever. But I mean, again, I feel for everyone in this situation, but I just think it should be moved forward.
Thank you, Tracy. Deborah, did you have your hand up again?
I did, but my dog interrupted me and I totally forgot my point. I'm sorry.
That's okay. You want to go now, or did the dog steal your thunder? No pun intended. Mike, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'll just make one quick point, and I meant to make it previously, and I saw Mr. Lisk's comment in the chat as well, to reiterate that Dr. Thunder's findings were with all 6 motors running, it would be 36, not 39. He said that the current ambient noise at the property line is 35, I believe he had said, and that it could be down to 33 if you took the insect noises out of there. That's where the difference was. But the total noise with all 6 motors running based on the testing that he did and the findings that he had was 36, which is 14 decibels below our current threshold, which is what we should operate under, because until we make a change as council or change whatever those thresholds are, I think in fairness to any citizen, we should judge them and hold them accountable to what the standards are right now today that we're having this discussion, not what they may or may not be in the future. But if not, I mean, once again, to take it further, even if we did change our threshold from 50 to 45 as what's proposed by the department, you're still a full 9 decibels below that with all 6 motors running. So it's 36 versus 39. So, I mean, we're not, if we were right on the threshold or the precipice or 1 decibel off of what we're, the threshold we're looking at, I could understand there being some concern potentially using an estimation versus the actual all 6 running test. But we're way off. I mean, he's well below anywhere close to the threshold. So, I mean, those having all 6 run at the same time and having that test, you could have a significant amount of additional noise, and he still would be below the thresholds, the way I see it, and based on what Dr. Thunder had said. So that's the point I just wanted to make.
Thank you, Mike. Deborah, go ahead, please. And Teresa, I have you next.
I remembered what I was going to say. I heard somebody say that something about if we went ahead and moved this forward with the current standard, if we change the standard, would Mr. List be responsible for that? But if we construct an ordinance and pass an ordinance by council, and that's got one level of DBA in it in that ordinance, then that's the level that we would have to follow, even if we change it below what the current level is. So I just kind of wanted to clear that up, because I think I heard something totally different.
Thank you, Deborah. Teresa?
Yeah, just to clarify what Dr. Thunder's report was showing, that that decibel level that he was talking about, that he had predicted would change to, was based on if these motors were running at the same level and at optimal function. They did not run at optimal function at one time. They didn't run at all when they were there the first visit. So no matter how much I want to assume or listen for myself, I can't quantify that unless there's some measurement taken on those machines, because they had some clogging in them at one time. I don't know if it's changed something, if it's changed a discrete noise that would raise it up by 5 more decibels in the results. I don't know that. So my position still stands, just from scientific knowledge of the past. I can't determine a specific test result on what I think or I assume.
Thank you, Teresa. Steve, I see you got your hand up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Bertoni. Councilmember Nyan asked a very, very important question. Mr. Vunich and I both nodded our heads, but I want to verbalize the answer just to make sure, because it's very important to keep in mind. This is not a one and done kind of deal. This is not an issue where you all take a vote and then that's it. The city can do nothing. The point is, and Ms. Nyan asked the question, if Mr. Lisk's operation exceeds whatever the criteria is and establishes, if he exceeds it, are there any ramifications? The answer is yes. We have code enforcement. The city can enforce whatever decibel level this committee decides on. And if it is determined, and if there are complaints and the city through code enforcement or other measures determines that has been exceeded, or it appears to be exceeded, then the city can shut that operation down. It's as simple as that. And perhaps in whatever you decide that goes from this committee to council, perhaps you build in a caveat that says you go out, that code enforcement can visit the property quarterly, or somebody can go out and test quarterly to ensure that the decibel level is maintained. Build that into your decision so that we have some teeth that we can enforce it. And in fact, if it turns out that this is all a sham and that it is at 50, 55, 60, whatever, the city has leverage. So I want to make sure that you know that what you vote on now is not, that's it. We can never go back again. Make sure that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Before we go to a vote, Joe, there's a lot of comments on some things. Do you have any final comments you want to make, or?
No, sir, but thank you for the offer.
Okay, so seeing anything else, and Deborah, I know you get your hand up, but you've already spoken twice, and it is the one thing that I try to stick with. So seeing no other questions, let's do a roll call vote on this, if we could, please. Mr. Cruz?
Councilmembers Clark,
No.
Councilmember Nian, is that a yes?
Yes, sorry.
There we go.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yeah.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
No.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
and Chair Bartoni.
Yes. So, okay, that motion passes and we will see it at council. Joe, will that be at our next council meeting? Is that your plan, or will it be 2 meetings from now?
That's a good question. I'll see how much Mr. Newberry and I can get done tomorrow and talk with Mr. Cross. It may be at the meeting on the 27th, the next meeting, but no later than the first meeting in October.
Okay, thank you. Great discussion, everyone, and appreciate all the comments. The next item on our agenda is the status of the tree preservation. Joe, are you doing this one also?
Yes, sir. And sorry for dominating the presentations.
Quite all right.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you know, at the beginning of this year, not necessarily right at the beginning of this year, the Planning and Zoning Commission began a process of reviewing the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code. A public hearing was held, and during the public hearing, the Planning and Zoning Commission members had quite a few questions and some direction for the Department of Planning as we proceeded forward. Integral to this process has been the assistance of Dr. Rambo, and that as an expert, or at least an expert as I consider it, he has some background as well as some thoughts on how we might improve our tree preservation and restoration code to not only address the definitions and the procedures that are dated now almost 25 plus years, but just the fact that there are weather patterns that are changing and that are basically our woodlands are being impacted by such. And so this is an opportune time to kind of address a very, very important issue to the city of Wildwood. And to that end, as part of the memorandum, the department has identified the items that it has been doing since the last discussion was held here at the committee. And suffice to say, we've cast a wide net. We've brought in experts from the private sector, such as Davie Resource Group, and we're working very closely with the Missouri Department of Conservation and pretty much everyone in between. We've also taken the opportunity to talk with our code enforcement officials, those that have to basically make determinations each day about what the code says, how it's applied, and what's right and what's wrong. And so tonight, the department was just giving you an update on the progress that is being made and a projected timeline. We hope sometime in winter of 2021, or certainly sometime in winter of 2022, we'll have a draft of the regulations for review by the committee and thorough discussion. No action is required tonight. Any suggestions on any items we might have missed would be appreciated. But other than that, I believe Mr. Newberry, Dr. Rambo, and I are available for any comments or questions.
Thank you, Joe. And Rob, I know this has been very important to you and near and dear to your heart. Do you have anything that you want to add?
Joe covered it thoroughly. I will say that Robin, our new planner, is doing yeoman work on this project so far, and she's taken the ball and run with it. And I expect it to be great for the city. And I don't think it's going to take till next fall. I think we'll be looking at something here in the next few months. That's all.
Thank you, Rob. Deborah, I see you got your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. So you have 4 areas of study. The 4th one is other considerations. Can you please define that a little bit better than?
Well, that, Ms. McCutcheon, is kind of the catch-all. We know we have regulations in place that need to be reviewed. Those regulations are supported by the landscape manual and the sustainable planning's guide. But the assumption of the department, and I believe others that have participated, is there's probably a lot out there that we're not touching upon. And that may just be the changing weather patterns and what it's doing to the woodland assets, not only here in Wildwood, but elsewhere across the country and world. And so, not to limit our ability to just those 3 items that we currently have, the department thought of adding other considerations. They'll be further defined as we delve into some of the more detailed discussions with Davie Resource Group, the Missouri Department of Transportation, and then receive information from the American Planning Association as well.
I'm glad to hear that you're being very thorough. And then my other question, Joe, is regarding the mailings. Looks like we're doing the postcard at the Wildwood celebration only. If that's correct, why aren't we reaching out to all of our residents?
First and foremost, it's always a cost factor. And certainly, if we get a good response at the Celebrate Wildwood event on Saturday, our intent is to publish something very similar on our website, make the availability of it known on all of our social media, as well as our e-newsletter. But certainly at the end of the day, if the city council should choose to want to do a mailing to every household, that's something we've done in the past as the department and can certainly pursue with the authorization. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Joe? Okay, thank you. And Joe, you said no action on this one, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
Okay, the next thing on our agenda is the format of the project reporting. Joe, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as the memorandum kind of touches upon, in some regards, we live in the golden age of information, in that information is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, etc. And that there are many, many resources to obtain your information now. And that's inclusive of the city of Wildwood. We have a website, we have social media outlets that I've just mentioned. We have the e-newsletter that is supplemented by the Gazette, which is our primary publication twice a year. And then certainly there's all the information we generate on a day-to-day basis that's copied to different council people, the overall council, different boards, commissions, committees, task force, etc. Suffice to say, the system is not perfect. And certainly at times there is, let's say, gaps in the process and information isn't obtained by the people that need it to make the best possible decisions. And so the department, in conversation with the city administrator, thought that an appropriate approach might be each month the department provide a status report to this committee relative to planning matters, park matters, and then also keep a running tab on what we're seeing in terms of zoning authorizations, the things that basically tell us the vibrancy of our community. People replacing decks, people building new decks, swimming pools, interior finishes, new single-family dwellings. That way, at the end of the year, you'll know, as well as anyone, what we've been doing collectively as a city and the department as an agent of the city. The intent is hopefully to avoid any surprises in the future and provide you as the decision makers the information maybe in a single format, albeit on a monthly basis, but certainly in a single format that you can use if you get constituent questions, or at least if you see it and have questions, you know that there's something out there to talk about. So tonight, the department is seeking authorization to add to our monthly agenda a status sheet, so to speak, that will kind of cover everything from A to Z relative to the Department of Planning and Parks, and anything that we think from either the city administrator or the Department of Planning that is necessary to be identified as either an outlier or a special circumstance that you need to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Rob, I see you got your hand up. Go ahead, please. Rob, you are muted.
Okay, sorry about that. I think this is a great idea. I think the report we get from Mr. Cross is quite useful. It's a great format. It lays things out well. The report we get from Mr. Young is equally so, although it's got all that legalese and gobbledygook in it that's kind of hard to follow. It's kind of guru intensive in a way, but I think this is a great idea. I'm thrilled to support it. Joe, what do you need? Do you need a motion to proceed with that, or? Because I'll make that motion. I just don't know how to phrase it.
Certainly, if there's not an objection on the part of the chair, just a motion, second and voice vote to authorize the addition of this item to the monthly agenda.
Okay, so moved.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Councilmember Farmer is seconded that emotion. Teresa, I see your hand up. Go ahead, please.
I think this is excellent. And Mr. Vonich, I think you're going to be exceptionally excellent at putting this together because you're very detail oriented. And I think that this could be, if we could use this as a standardized format so that it's like a benchmark for the rest of the committees and groups, so that every committee has the same format, it would be a lot easier to read and just get it at a glance and understand what's going on, even if we're not in that committee or commission or board. So I think that using this as a benchmark would be a good idea. Thank you.
I like that idea a lot, Councilmember Clark. Mr. Cross, is that something that all the committees could practice?
Mr. Chair, certainly. Certainly. The impetus of this particular report, starting with this committee, since this was pretty much the next committee that met after we had this discussion at council, and as you all know, I was given an assignment by you all, the mayor and the full council, to develop a report whereby I note and point out anything that the council members need to know about any upcoming issues, any votes, anything that is important. And that was the purpose of my email yesterday, in fact, to the mayor and to the council about tonight's discussion about the aquaculture operation. So Mr. Vunish and I sat down, we discussed it. So this type of report will certainly be the basis for anything that that I will be providing to council from my department, for my office, in terms of something that you all certainly need to know about. So yes, the other committees, they're, in some cases perhaps doing something similar, but we can address this with each committee as it comes up. Yes.
Thank you. So, Joe, I have one question. So on, our typical agenda, and tonight's agenda being typical, like the last item we have is the update of reservations, which quite often is just like an FYI for us. So is that pretty much the intention of this monthly report? This is an FYI and it's our responsibility to read it. And if there's any questions, we could just ask you at that point, or will there be action items associated with it monthly?
I don't see any action items particularly associated with it unless Mr. Cross Mr. Newberry, Mr. Cruz, or I identify something that's of particular importance that we seek direction, but I would see it as like the last two items, the update on virtual and in-person recreation, as well as the reservations, maintenance, et cetera. And then that way, if there are questions, we can spend as much time or as little time as necessary to address them. But and certainly if there's a feeling after you see the first version of it that we should make it something where it's discussed at each meeting, we can do that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Any other questions or comments for Joe in the department? Okay, thank you, everyone. That takes us to park matters. The first item is the preliminary concept for a hardcourt area in community park. Joe, go ahead, please.
Mr. Chair, not to put the car
we
in
vote?
reverse, but I don't think
we
we
did
voted
not.
on it.
We did not. We had a motion on the floor also to proceed with the department's recommendation to add this to the agenda, and we did have a second. So we can do this one probably by a voice vote. All those in favor of the department's recommendation, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you guys for watching over me. That takes us to park matters now, and the first item is the preliminary concepts of a hardcourt area in community park. I didn't say that any easier the second time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you all are aware, the matter of a hardcourt area in one of our parks facilities has been discussed since the beginning of 2021. It was initially identified by the department as part of 7 smaller projects that involve some of our existing park facilities and necessary upgrades or overall maintenance. Thereafter, several of the committee members, including Mr. Galani and Mr. Flasher, identified that they've been getting contacted by a number of their constituents about the desire to have pickleball courts, which can be part of an overall hard court surface area. At a recent meeting of the committee, we discussed potential locations which range from Glencoe, the area of Al Foster Memorial Trailhead in the Glencoe City Park, to Community Park. Ultimately, Community Park was selected by the committee as its first choice, and the department urged the committee to consider the southern end of this facility, that area abutting State Route 100. To that end, the department asked TerraSpec, a park designer, to do an initial investigation of that location, that southern end of Community Park, and come back with a schematic about how it might work. After TerraSpec did that analysis, it became clear that the southern end of the park has more topography than once thought. And obviously, to utilize the area that had been what was once showed as our salt storage facility on Community Park, it would require more of an engineered solution. The park designer also identified that these facilities typically have in close proximity a limited amount of parking as well as restroom facilities. And so after discussion in that regard, a thought was to put it on the southern end of the Great Meadow area. And those locations are reflected in option A and option A1 on sheet CP-1. I believe Mr. Newberry is going to bring it up on the screen for me, and thank you for doing that. In the two options, the major difference is the orientation, and the orientation is key because how the sun rises and sets. Preferably, the orientation is always, let's say, on a linear east to west. That way, the sun isn't necessarily as prevalent or problematic. And so that's the preferred design from the park designer. The problem the department noticed is that it does require the removal of several very good trees that have been retained in the Great Meadow area. And At one time, if we shift it, it also goes into the 50-foot flood top of bank or floodplain setback. The orientation identified as A1 is north to south, which creates a problem, obviously, from the standpoint of sun and the glare it would create while people are on the court. It can be squeezed in between the two woodland areas and certainly complies with the 50-foot setback as identified on the plan sheet. The good news is it's a short walk, as you can see, to the pavilion area by the playground where ample restroom facilities and water is available. And there are 12 existing parking spaces in close proximity. So tonight, the department is offering an option that's different than our original thought, and that's in the southern end of the Great Meadow area. The orientation, obviously, from the player's perspective, is preferred east to west, as shown in option A. And certainly we can do our best to try to work around as many of the trees as possible. So tonight, the department is seeking input on this particular location versus the one on the southern end of Community Park. And if there's a preference in orientation, and then if all is good, then we would proceed forward to the next step and start putting together a more detailed plan and some cost estimates for our next meeting in October. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Rob, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Oh, we got it unmuted the first time. Yeah, I think based on my understanding of where this is located, the trees will provide shade early in the morning when there's not likely to be a lot of people out there playing, and late in the day. So the sun will be, mostly overhead, or it will be hidden behind a tree line. And so I don't think it's as great a concern as it might be, the orientation. And I like the second orientation because it doesn't take out any of the trees. So the first one, option A, I think we can discount the one by the highway. It's just going to be quite costly and we'd have to knock down a whole lot of stuff. And so I'm just proceeding as though we're talking about two options. I like the idea of removing the minimal amount of trees. We've already got parking. It's just a great spot. I'm a bit concerned about intrusion on the Great Meadow because it is a very nice field, but it's just that, it's a field. And I don't think these things will take up an inordinate amount of space. So I'm inclined towards A1 because of the reasons I mentioned. I think the floodplain is a concern. It may get, Dan and I talked about this a little bit offline after this document came out, and I think the flooding is a concern, but not a great one, because as I understand the contour over there, we'd probably have to do some cutting at the north end and then fill at the south end, which will raise that corner up a bit more, and maybe there's a retaining wall or something there, but I don't think it's probably not likely to flood unless that whole field floods at some point. So I think this is a really good creative solution to our problem. My remaining questions are, one, you don't show, I guess this was probably just a sketch of playing fields, but you don't show any painted basketball facility or anything there. And I'm wondering, we're hoping to have people, shoot hoops there. And I'm wondering if it's too early to talk about it, or if we've given any thought to where the hoops ought to be in relation to the tennis and pickleball, parts of this thing. And the other suggestion I would have is I have 6, dear children that I some of them think they live at my house, but they are all volleyball nuts. And I think if we're missing the boat if we don't talk about sand volleyball as part of this or as an adjunct to this, because we're nearby the pavilions, people love it.
It's kind of a family recreational type of thing. It's really cheap. I think there are courts elsewhere in other communities that we could, get their input on. But I haven't heard anything bad about, sand volleyball. So I know maybe this is beyond the scope, but I've been, harping on it from day one. If we're going to help people out and provide play facilities, we ought to consider that maybe as part of this little complex. So that's my spiel. I actually did ask one question in there, Joe, if you can dig it out.
Well, Dr. Rambo, I think the intent is to maximize the versatility of these spaces. And so the next step would be, once a location and orientation is selected by the committee members, is to start to do exactly that, to see how much we can use these facilities for multiple activities.
Tracy, go ahead, please.
I kind of like the A1 option as well, for all the reasons that Rob just mentioned. I also feel like if the courts did get a little more sun, it may be a little hotter in certain times of the year, but it also might extend the playing time, because if there's sun in the fall, or shoot, in the winter around here, it can be 60 in the sun. It's very comfortable. It's not, also as far as the glare in tennis, that usually comes when you're serving, and in pickleball, you're not serving like that. So you're not looking up when you serve. And I feel like it's not as much of an issue with glare when you play pickleball as it is when you play tennis. So I guess I just prefer that location for those reasons.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Does anybody want to make a motion that the department is looking for? So Councilmember Flasher, you're making the motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion for A1 for all the reasons that Rob mentioned. I think that's the more desirable option myself.
Okay, and Mike, were you making a second? Were you seconding a motion?
Yep, I was going to say A1 as well. Second that. And also one other thing is, when you put it up too close to trees or underneath trees, you're going to have a lot of debris from those trees falling on the courts, which is going to be a nuisance for people that are trying to play.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion? Any questions for Joe? Joe, I do have one question before we go to a vote. Like, if A1 is the one we move forward with, I guess, I don't know if it's the next step, but would an elevation drawing be coming as well? Because that could tell us, like, how tall are those trees? Like, because if they are, 70, 80 feet tall, then the sun in your eyes is probably not going to be as big of an issue if the trees were 8 feet tall.
Mr. Chair, we can certainly have TerraSpec provide that. I was thinking of like a cross section. I think what you've described is probably more informative. So I want to get this back to you all in October, because we'll be doing the budget. That'll be more the operational components of planning and parks. But shortly thereafter, we'll be into capital improvements programming, both for 2022 and the 5-year window. So I think it's critical you have some idea of cost, so that if we want to integrate it in for next year's fiscal year, or somewhere down the road, then you'll have the information you need. Thank you.
Good point. Rob, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just a real quickie. Joe, isn't this, you're hoping to nestle this in behind that grove of sycamores, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, so those trees are 40 feet tall. They have big old honking leaves on them, but not that many. And so they come down all at once, and then you got to blow them off and be done with it. So I don't think that's a huge concern. I think maybe Mr. Galani mentioned it, but I don't think we should worry too much about that part.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. We can do this with the voice vote as well. All those in favor of proceeding with the department's recommendation for option A1, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you very much, everybody. Looking forward to seeing this at the next stage. Next item is just the update on the in-person and virtual recreation programs. Joe, is this just part of the FYI we get?
Actually, I believe I have Bluffview Park in there.
Oh, you do. My bad. I skipped one. So yeah, the next item is the Bluffview Park. So go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be brief. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you know, the city received a $525,000 grant from the Municipal Park Grant Commission of St. Louis County. And with the support of the city council, money was set aside this year for the design, engineering, and bid package preparation. The park designer has been working diligently to pull all the components together for that bid process. And tonight, the park designer wanted to at least provide to all of the committee members and for these renderings, kind of showing how the three primary areas of improvement are being planned. The first is the parking lot area and the island that is in the middle of that parking lot area. The entry area into the trail system, which is at the southern end of the parking lot, and then the Bluff location overlooking the Merrimack River and the Crescent Valley. As you can see, it's still very much a passive setting beyond what the mountain bike community is doing. The intent is to add additional landscaping, plus shade structures and picnic areas for users. This is the island that's defined by the two sides of the parking lot, the existing parking lot. The entry area, the intent there is to also create a focal point for the park, which somewhat lacks at this time. There are a couple of shade structures shown there as well. And again, just kind of reorientating it and taking advantage of some natural beauty that already exists there. And then finally, out at the Bluff, the intent is to create a contemplative area. We're actually looking at relocating the existing trail that is there that many of the mountain bikers use and pulling it away from the Bluff a greater distance. So as if you are on the Bluff and looking out over onto the Merrimack River and the Crescent Valley area, you're really not being interrupted by anything other than your thoughts or someone else that is in the vicinity of the location. A key component of the Bluff area as well is that the road that provides access to it now from the parking lot is not ADA accessible. And the intent is to actually make that road ADA accessible. And so that if anyone of any ability wants to access the Bluff, they'll be able to accomplish it with respect to grade. And once at the Bluff, there will be accommodations for them there as well. Mr. Burrows did provide some comments to Mr. Cross and I and questioned the number of shade structures. And certainly there are a great deal of them. And again, we can certainly look at that as we move forward into the next step, which is the actual engineered plans and some cost estimates. And we'll see where we are, but that would be the first item of the plans that obviously we could probably cut back on, save some costs, and make a project that is still very, very successful. So tonight, the department is just presenting it for your consideration. And if you have any suggestions or thoughts, we'd love to hear them as we start hardlining some additional, the bid package information for future advertisement. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Is anybody got any questions or comments for the department? Okay, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Joe. So now we are to the update on the in-person and virtual recreation program. So Joe, just FYI us here.
And Mr. Chair, I don't know if you noticed, but Ms. Clark had her hand raised.
Oh, I did not see that. I'm sorry, Teresa, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to thank Joe, you and the department for addressing the accessibility, the ADA accessibility you know that I was going to say something about that probably that was written on my notes, and not to be a scratch in my record and repeat myself. I guess not everyone would understand that analogy that didn't have record players when they were kids, but I thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you, Teresa. Actually, the record players are coming back popular again. So, Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Bartoni. Yes, Ms. Clark talked about records, but she didn't go into those of us that remember 78 records and 45. So. You know, so now we can slice it even further about how far back you want to go. Do you want to go to LPs or 45s or 78s? But anyway, I digress. With regards to accessibility, we discussed it at the council meeting. I just wanted to point out and make sure that Ms. Clark and everybody knows the building in the accessibility and making a road ADA compliant or anything. This is part and parcel of what we do here in the city. This is nothing new. And so this has always been done when Mr. Vunich and the department is looking, and Public Works as well, when Mr. Brown, if he were here as well. This is something that's been part and parcel of what the department does, both the departments, for years. It is part of code. It is everything that we do. So that's one of the first things that are looked at when designing a park, designing a sidewalk, designing anything. Accessibility is key to making sure that it is ADA compliant and otherwise accessible. So yes, kudos to Mr. Vunich and the department for mentioning that, but it's not out of the ordinary. It's just built into the process. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to the in-person and virtual recreation programs.
Well, Mr. Chair, as you've mentioned, this is just an item of information. If there are any questions, Mr. Cruz can certainly address them as our expert on the events that we offer both in person and virtually. Thank you.
Any questions? Anybody got anything for Gary? Okay, seeing none, the next item on the agenda is usually just FYI also, just the reservations and registrations and maintenance. Does anybody have any questions or comments for the department on those? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. We do have an executive session on the agenda. We will need a motion to go into executive session. Motion made by Tracy. I see you get your hand up, making the motion. Teresa is seconding the motion. All those in favor of going into the executive session, please say aye.
This
Aye.
requires
Aye.
a roll call.
Oh, you're
Roll
right.
call.
This is the roll call one. You're right. Mr. Cruz, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
and Chair Bartoni.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, Mr. Newberry needs to end the recording and do something with YouTube so we're not broadcasting it.
Okay. Travis, do your thing
Wow.
to, oh, sure. There you go.
Sorry for the interruption. Thank you.
Oh, that's fine. That's, I was gonna make sure you were recording and we're all legit again. So that is everything on the agenda. Does anybody else have any other comments they want to make or anything? Anything under miscellaneous? Joe, go ahead, please.
In great anticipation of the decoration of the golf course, as soon as they're available here at City Hall, we'll be sending you all an email advising of such. And certainly if you feel like decorating them on Friday, that's an option. I don't know what the weather, how they'll hold up, but certainly if you want to come by and take a look and see what you've got, and what you need, they'll be available for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe, and looking forward to seeing what everybody has done. Rob, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Joe, remember the hicks and the sticks in Ward 6 are driving a gator, so we won't need one of the, you know, make sure you don't have an extra golf cart. We're just gonna throw a couple hay bales in the back and maybe a saddle and, you know, whatever, couple chainsaws and go for it.
I look with great anticipation to see what the outcome of your decorating efforts. Thank you.
Yeah, my gator's pretty high tech, but Jaxie's is a classic. It looks like an old timey, you know, 1940s car. It's gonna be great.
Even though it has become very popular, no axe throwing. Okay, Rob? Anybody have anything else? All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Made by Councilmember Flasher, seconded by Councilmember Farmer, is non-debatable. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, looking forward to seeing everybody this weekend. Great meeting, great discussion. So
Yeah, great job,
thank you,
guys.
department. Yeah, thank you, Joe, Travis, Gary, and Steve. Appreciate everything you do in the evenings for us.